good morning, and we come on the air early this morning with the latest on the breaking news of the hour from the Vatican. Pope Francis has died. The 88-year-old pontiff passed away just hours after he surprised many by addressing the Easter Sunday crowd at St. Peter's, even riding through the square in his famous Pope Mobile. He also held a meeting at the Vatican with Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yeah, that's why this news, despite the Pope's age, despite his recent health struggles, really caught a lot of folks by surprise. He appeared to be on the road to recovery after suffering double pneumonia that led to a 38-day hospital stay.
We want to turn now to NBC's Claudio Luvanga, who has made his way to the Vatican for us in Rome. Claudio, good morning to you, and kind of set the scene there right now. The Catholic Church officially in mourning.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Craig. I don't know if you can hear that. Those are the bells slowly ringing in St. Peter's Square, announcing, of course, the death of the Pope. It was the literal announcement that came out a few hours ago. But the Vatican just said that right now at noon, this is noon right now in Rome, a special rosary will be recited for Pope Francis. It is literally about to happen. I was here just 24 hours ago with tens of thousands of faithful celebrating Easter. And as you mentioned, it did look like the Pope was slowly on his way to recovery, because he made that sudden and surprise appearance on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica behind me. He looked frail, as he has in the last few months, but there was a good sign. He was not wearing those oxygen cannulas in his oxygen tubes in his nose, and that led us believe that he was slowly improving. Also, he spoke, he said, "Happy Easter to everyone," and then he got on a Pope Mobile to tour St. Peter's Square among an ecstatic crowd of pilgrims, because that was the first time he's done that since he left hospital more than a month ago. And then this morning, less than 24 hours later, we woke up to the shocking news. Now, St. Peter's Square was already full of people early this morning, even before the news came along, because this is, of course, Easter Monday. It is also Jubilee year, so there's more pilgrims than usual, and some of them, we had to break the news to some of them. They were not aware that the Pope had died. So a lot of people are coming in now from everywhere in Rome to pay their respects to the much-loved Pope Francis. Savannah, Craig.
All right, Claudio, thank you very much.
NBC's Ann Thompson has covered Pope Francis extensively. She was at the Vatican for much of his recent hospitalization. You were there for more than 2 weeks. Ann, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And you are also a very good Catholic as well, so we're sorry for your loss personally.
Thank you.
You know, Ann, here we are the day after the holiest of holidays for Christians in the world, and Pope Francis slips away. Let's start with just the significance of the timing.
I think that obviously it's very significant. It comes the day after Easter, the day after Catholics and Christians around the world celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But I think more than anything, you saw the Pope on his last day at his happiest. Nothing made Pope Francis happier than being a pastor, than being among his people. It's one of the things that frustrated him, and that's why you saw increasingly during Holy Week these sort of special appearances that he would make at the Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. And that's what he loved. He loved being among the people. He never thought of himself as a monarch or anybody special. He thought of himself as a pastor, bringing God's word to his people, and that's what you saw in his final hours.
And in his final days, even doing his traditional visit with prison inmates
exactly.
at a prison near Rome. Talk about what's next now. I mean, a lot of these plans have been in place literally for years. There's a period of mourning, there's a funeral for the Pope, and then there will be a conclave to elect a new Pope.
Right. So the first thing that happens will be the papal funeral, and that happens usually within 4 to 6 days of his death. We haven't heard any official word from the Vatican when that will happen. The cardinals from around the world will come to Rome for that funeral. And then there is a period called the congregations, where the cardinal electors, and there are about 135 of them, get together and they have speeches, because while they're all cardinals, they really don't know each other, and they have to get to know each other. And then after that period, there will be a conclave, and that's when the cardinal electors go into the Sistine Chapel and everyone else is ushered out, and they spend days voting on who will be the next pope. And so that's what will happen. The dean of the College of Cardinals will call the conclave. That too has yet to happen. But what you will see and what you will notice the difference from, for example, Pope John Paul II's funeral versus Francis is Francis wanted a more simple funeral. He wanted it to be more streamlined. And he's not going to be buried at the Vatican. He's going to be buried at Santa Maria Maggiore, which is where he goes to visit the icon of the Blessed Virgin, the Christ's mother, before and after each trip. And it's also the basilica where St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, and that's the order of which Francis was, celebrated his first Mass. So there are many, many symbols, and that's where he will be buried.
The only Jesuit pope
yes.
so far. And again, I know a lot of time will be spent over the next few hours, especially talking about this pope's legacy, especially. What do you think?
Oh, it's mercy and compassion. He is the man who brought the Catholic Church, especially the U.S. Catholic Church, away from the culture wars and back to Christ's basic message, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that is what I think excited people about his papacy. And then the other thing is, he said, we have a responsibility to reach out to the least of us, the people, the marginalized, the people on the peripheries, as he spoke of them. And even in the Vatican, he had a big outreach program to the homeless. He set up showers for them. He arranged barbers for them and hairdressers. And that kind of, every time he celebrated his birthday, it was always with a group of homeless people. It was never with anybody fancy or the princes of the church, as the cardinals are known. That's who he liked to be with. That's who he felt compelled to mission.
And set aside some of the more, I guess, ostentatious displays that sometimes popes had. Didn't live in the famous papal apartments. Chose a more austere lifestyle for himself.
Right. And one of the reasons he didn't live in the papal apartments is he liked people around him. And he said he would have gone crazy because you'd be very isolated in the Apostolic Palace. He lived in Casa Santa Marta, which, as a friend of mine described, as a Holiday Inn Express with marble floors. It's not particularly fancy, but he liked that. It's the visiting hotel. It's the hotel on the papal grounds or on the Vatican grounds. And he liked being around people. And that need to be around people is what you saw in the last week of his life. That's why he kept going out. I would watch this and think, stay back, get well. That's the most important thing. But that was part of his being well, was being among the people.
Thank you, Anne.
And thank you. I want to turn now to Christopher White, who is a reporter for the National Catholic Reporters, a longtime Vatican correspondent. Christopher, good morning to you. I know you've been listening to this conversation. I mean, in some ways, Pope Francis was a reformer and clashed with more conservative members of the clerical order and the cardinals. How do you think he's going to be remembered?
I think this is a pope that was unafraid to bring the church in dialogue with the modern world, to answer and listen to hard questions and to not be afraid. As Anne mentioned, he really wasn't interested in banging people on the head with doctrine, but he really wanted to accompany people in where they are in life. And I think that's why, as Anne rightly noted, he was so appreciated and beloved by Catholics and non-Catholics alike.
Christopher, looking ahead now, again, we know that this is going to be a period of mourning for the Catholic Church. There'll be a funeral, then there'll be the conclave. As the Catholic Church looks to the next pope, what do you think that the Church will be looking for in the next pontiff?
I think, there are 136 cardinal electors who will all come to Rome in the coming days. And I think when they're behind closed doors, they're going to talk about a profile before they talk about a person. And they'll weigh things like, how much do we want this person to be good at government and just the average, work of governing the church, management? Or how much do we want this person to have more of an outward-facing missionary personality? And they'll weigh those and discuss what's needed in this moment. And that will, certain tensions will emerge in that process. But I think they'll talk a lot more about what the church needs before they talk about who.
Well, let's talk about some of that orthodoxy. And I mentioned some of the clashes that had taken place with some of the more conservative members of the Catholic Church over doctrinal things like the Latin Mass, but also about social issues. And, you know, when you look at the whole picture of Pope Francis, there's a little bit of something for everybody. I mean, in some ways, progressives were heartened by some of his stances, but didn't think they went far enough. There are other ways in which, again, he clashed with conservative members of the church. So where does he fit when you look at the whole picture?
You can't really map Pope Francis onto certainly not American political categories. I mean, one of his famous lines in one of his early documents was that everything is connected. And so for Pope Francis, he began with the sort of dignity of the human person. And so that's what led him to oppose abortion, but also have a very strong defense of migrants and climate change. And so I think that's why some people often found him a bit puzzling. How do you characterize this guy? Is he a progressive? Is he a conservative? And in a sense, he was both.
Ann Thompson here in the studio with us, and just to that point, to a certain extent, he was talking about this Pope being more progressive than some of his predecessors. The role of women in the church. This is a Pope who also seemed to go out of his way to really promote women more than some of his predecessors had.
He did. He tried to put, or he did put women in leadership positions across the Vatican to some great resistance, actually. But he would not go as far as to support women's ordination to the priesthood. That, he said, that door was closed. John Paul II had closed the door on that. He said the theology just didn't line up. He has had commissions looking at the issue of women becoming deacons within the church, but that remains unresolved. And I think a lot of people will think he did not do enough for women. While he did some things, it wasn't enough.
We have to also look at the clergy's sex abuse scandal that was pervasive for his papacy and his predecessors as well. And he had some missteps, but finally came around to a point of really acknowledging the sin of the church in overlooking these abuses. And I remember the words he chose: "We abandoned the little one."
Yeah, and that came from listening. He went to Chile and had a disastrous visit there. It was rocked by sex scandals, and he believed his cardinals, who said these people, basically said these people are not telling the truth. He came back, he had his investigator go to Chile, and he turned out this 2,000-page report that basically said the Pope had been lied to. And then what he did, he invited 4 of the men who had been abused by priests over to the Vatican for a week in April to listen to their stories. And that turned him around. He did a 180-degree turn on the issue. And think of how many world leaders do you know that make that kind of dramatic turn on an issue? Almost none. And that was after listening to the victims.
And really quickly here, as we look ahead, we just saw a live look there at the Vatican. This is, I guess, there have been several times during our lifetime where we've seen this. There's a live look there at the Vatican. Over the next few days and weeks, folks who are not Catholic, what can we expect to see? What can we expect to hear and unfold?
I think you will see the world come to Rome. That's typically what happens when a pope dies. Especially, I was thinking of the Argentinians who loved this man, and he never went back to Argentina after he became pope. The closest he got was to Rio de Janeiro. But I think you will see that. You will see a lot of the pomp that we have come to associate with the Catholic Church, a lot of this ceremony, that is beautiful, but you will see a much more, I think, pastoral funeral than the grand funeral that you saw of St. John Paul II. And then I think what you will see is the church struggle with what the future should be, as Chris said, is that are they going to continue down the same path as Francis as far as opening the doors of the church wide to welcome everybody in, to acknowledge everyone as a sinner, or are they going to close those doors and make it more narrow and go back to go back to strict doctrine. And that to me is the real interesting question as to when the cardinals get together and how they choose the next pope.
Yeah, many questions facing the future of the church, but for the moment, mourning, a period of mourning for Pope Francis, who has passed away at the age of 88. Anne, thank you so much. We're going to have a lot more coming from the Vatican. What's next? The reaction from people here and around the world, especially as we're waking up here in the U.S.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.